You know, I do have to figure out how to do the music at some point, but we're
I'll just do it here for you. See, that's how we do it.
It's fine. Hey, all right. Hey, that doesn't matter now.
It matters.
Welcome back to the Comic Binge. You have arrived at episode 1 of Nights Never Die, Grant Morrison's Batman issue by issue. So before we actually before we actually make good on the promise of that subtitle, there's a little bit more setup that I think we need to do, and it's in the form of a DC collected edition that was released back in 2009, I believe. Early 2009, while Bruce Wayne was actually not really around much in the modern DC books. And you see it there on the image we've got here where Batman himself is holding the Black Casebook. So to talk about the Black Casebook and its significance in setting up what will be the subject of this series going forward until we get to the end, I have two wonderful guests with me. First of all, of course, is my co-host of the Comic Binge and the insane person who brought this entire idea to the fore, Mr. Paul Herman.
Hi.
Hello.
That's my voice. I heard my voice. Yes, thank you for joining us on the Comic Binge. Finally, I got Chris, or I should say Javi helped Chris get off his butt and actually start doing this, so this is good. So I'm people comment, leave love notes. You know, that's what I call comments now. Leave love notes, do all that stuff so people can get this stuff. And they also encourage Chris to do something on a more regular basis, for God's sakes, man. God. Anyway.
Well, we could, now, to be fair, we've got a little bit more setup to do before we're launching into this in earnest, because we're actually interestingly dovetailing with another title that we're doing on the Comic Binge. And that is, of course, 52. So chronologically speaking, we actually see the very beginning of the Bruce Wayne Grant Morrison saga in an issue of 52, and we're actually talking about that one in our next 52 binge. So,
next month or this month?
This month,
the 19th. Yeah, the 19th.
After that, there's nowhere else to go, man. It's time to go full speed ahead on Nights Never Die, and another partner in crime that I have enlisted in order to bring this discussion to life is Mr. Javi Trujillo.
I thought I was a partner in crime fighting.
Well, partner in crime fighting is far more. Are you guys
wearing the same shirt?
Accurate and adept.
No,
I don't think so. No.
I'm doing the 89 bat.
That's the same shirt.
No,
this is
the
89.
It doesn't have the actual wings on it. This is the. It's technically Batman Returns, but it's the same symbol he had in the Flash.
Oh God! Anyway,
this is Batman 89.
Yeah,
so it's different, Paul. That's why I have to get both Hot Toys, because they're different.
Paul has that shirt,
but you know,
I do.
It's Michael Keaton's birthday today, so I had to represent some Keaton love. And then it's Star Trek's birthday on Friday, so I have this NX-01 hat that Chris pointed me in the right direction of.
Give me strength.
So there we go. Hey, Paul, there's a lightsaber over here in the corner.
That's
behind
good.
me, just to make you feel better.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I got one of those with me too, right here. So
that's his man-made one.
Yeah, it's my lightsaber. Well, we have quite a set of stories to talk about here. So the Black Casebook. I think we've all got our copies. Paul only recently got a hold of his because this is a ludicrously difficult collection to find if you didn't get it back when it came out. And if you're trying to find it on the secondary market, the prices are heavily inflated because for whatever reason, DC does not have the foresight to keep it in print, even though they have Morrison's complete run in omnibus form that's available. This is an excellent companion to go along with whatever other Morrison Batman stories that you have. As you can see from the cover here, it's got an introduction written by Morrison themselves. And that introduction, I think, is really key to sort of understanding the necessity of going into these stories, because the key thesis for the entirety of Grant Morrison's Batman run is said in that introduction when he said, I decided to treat the entire publication history of Batman as the events in one man's extraordinarily vivid life, and the story of an ultimate villain capable of exploiting that entire history as a means of destroying Batman. So there are a bunch of different stories in here from, most of them are in the 1950s. So you're talking Silver Age, an era that, as Morrison explains in that introduction, most Batman fans would prefer to ignore. But when Morrison was doing research for actually taking over the Batman title at the behest of editor Peter Tomasi, and they first started having a conversation about it back in 1995, according to this introduction.
That's crazy.
Morrison went back into the archives and he tried, like, their first indication of what they wanted to do in the run. They realized that it had been done before, when they started reading these old Batman issues that everybody seems to want to forget, most especially in the post-crisis era. So by going a little bit deeper, they found just a collection of stories and concepts from specific angles that, when looked at through a modern lens, and particularly through the very unique lens that Grant Morrison is able to provide, you get some mind-bending material out of it if you wanted to try and exploit those stories with the sensibilities of modern comic book storytelling. So, and unfortunately, another fact of this collection, which we talked about off mic, is that all of the issues that are collected in here, and we'll go over them in a second, are not available in DC Universe Infinite, either in the standard or in the ultra tiers.
Hell.
So if you wanted to find these issues and you don't have access to this trade, you can probably find them in like Golden or Silver Age Batman omnibuses, but it's got a lot of extra stuff. It doesn't have the issues that were specifically curated by Morrison in relation to the run. This is by far the most efficient way to absorb these stories. So I think they are technically in print still in those omnibus forms, but not having them available through the streaming service or the electronic accessible service is definitely an oversight. And it makes it kind of a pain if you wanted to read these issues digitally.
Well, it's weird because,
yeah,
I mean, RIP was 2008.
Yeah.
So some time has passed. But if you look at what they're doing now, I mean, so much of Zdarsky's run is relying on like the whole Zur-En-Arrh of everything, which is based on Morrison's take, because it's different than what we see in this trade that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So you would think, because it's so relevant, and the fact that we still have a Batman Incorporated title, although I don't know why, but I mean, there's the current DC stuff that's being published right now. Like, it would behoove them to put a deluxe edition of this out for like an anniversary. Cause I mean, yeah, this is 15 years since RIP.
Yeah.
So they could get away with doing that. So it's just like, don't you want money? Because I would totally upgrade this softcover to a deluxe edition if it was available.
Well, and these stories are not very long either. And this is a relatively thin trade. You could have thrown that into the first Morrison omnibus too. Just saying.
Well, and I think I get a little bit, because obviously he didn't write these stories. But what's really fascinating for me from the outside coming into this, like, really quickly, for people who don't know, I looked everywhere for this thing, right? And I refused to pay more than $30-$40 for this thing. 40, I maybe would have pulled on 40, maybe. But then I was like, screw that. I'm not paying more than that for this. It's ridiculous. And sure enough, I walked into my trusty place, which, by the way, is officially ending this month, Chris. They did post a comment. They're gone. End of this month.
Really?
Yep. Just throwing it out there. Anyway, I got this for $10. I walked in, found this, and it was meant to be for this episode. because Chris so graciously, because he has all the omnibuses, gave me all of Grant Morrison's comics that I needed for the whole set, or for the whole, on trade to read. And I love physical comics, so I'm like, this is great. I love Grant Morrison, so this is even more great. So this became even more important for me to obtain, because I've only read itty bitty bits of the Morrison run as a whole. I've read Batman and Robin, the first year on that, which is fantastic. And I've read a couple of issues here and there, Return to Bruce Wayne, et cetera, et cetera. But I know a little bit about what it's about. This issue, or these issues, basically, I knew were kind of helped explain a little bit of what he was trying to do. And you always talked about, Chris. This was interesting, but I had to get this. And I'm glad it was meant to be, because I found it out of nowhere, which I was not expecting. And I'm very grateful I have this. And like you guys all said, I am blown away that DC does not have this in trade, or not in trade, but in even digitally. So yeah. What's crazy to me is why, I wanted to read these stories, and I figured they were already on there. And when I found this, I was like, well, that's great. I don't have to read them digitally anymore. And then I found out, oh, wait a minute, actually, this is the only way to read it. Oh my God, without doing illegal matters, if you will. So it's I
don't know what you're talking about.
No idea.
No idea.
It's crazy. It's crazy, y'all. So DC, like Chris said, why don't you put this in the Grant Morrison stuff, or at least Batman Incorporated, maybe? I mean, just leave it at that. I guess
that's something that I think becomes a little bit easier to see too, is that those issues do have reverberations through to the end of the run, including into the incorporated phase.
I can already see the incorporation part.
Yeah, totally.
Already.
Javi, one of the things I'm curious about, because I know you're reading the Morrison run as it came out, of course. Did you have an understanding of how far back they were going to be going in what they were citing, or did that become clearer for you once you got your hands on this?
It was a bit of a mixed bag for me. Like I've said on other podcasts, the way that I consumed comics as a kid was usually stuff that my dad would pick up at this place called Bookman's, and he would grab stuff that he was familiar with. So I read a lot of Marvel Tales and Silver Age, Batman and Green Lantern and Flash. So I had a decent understanding of Batman stories from that era. And then when the movie came out in '89, they had a greatest Batman. They had 3 volumes at the time in that year. Greatest Superman stories ever told was volume 1. Batman was volume 2, and Joker was volume 3. So I read a lot of those classic stories in that Batman volume, because they definitely had the first Batman being his dad, and Robin Dies at Dawn were in that collection. So I had some understanding of it, of the Club of Heroes, but there was a lot of stuff that I'd forgotten too, like Peter Mayhew being a character back then, and a few other things. So I had some touchstones like Batmite, and others were I needed a refresher I'd never experienced before. So it was a mixed bag of familiarity and brand new for me when I finally read this.
Sure. And I think that that's pretty understandable. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to be really curious to see exactly what everybody thinks of these collections of stories. Let's go through just briefly what's included in here. So, A Partner for Batman was published in Batman number 65, from cover date June-July of 1951. Batman Indian Chief from Batman number 86, September of 1954. The Batman of All Nations, Detective Comics number 215, January of 1955. That definitely has a critical degree of importance, especially early in the run, but also it sort of echoes again much later in the run.
Mm-hmm.
The First Batman from Detective Comics number 235, which September of 1956. And then we go back to the Club of Heroes and World's Finest number 89, July, August of 1957. The Man Who Ended Batman's Career, Detective number 247 from September of 1957. Then Batman, the Superman of Planet X, critically important issue again from Batman 113 in February of 1958. Batman meets Batmite in Detective 267. You can see there's a wide variety of genres that these stories are going through, and that's kind of a hallmark of this era of Batman stories, as any big Batman fan will know. And as Morrison alludes to in their introduction, a lot of people would prefer to forget that anything like this ever happened. There are people who believe Batman doesn't belong in space. Interdimensional imps don't belong in Batman stories. Maybe mind-bending experiments for the military don't belong in Batman stories. But that's just the way that it is. Batman 134, The Rainbow Creature, from September of 1960. And then my personal favorite, Batman number 156, Robin Dies at Dawn, from June of 1963. And then Batman 162 is The Batman Creature. And that is March of 1964. So you're running about 13 years worth of different kinds of Batman stories that really help define this era. Creators including Kane himself, Bill Finger, Sheldon Maldoff, Dick Sprang, Charles Paris, and many more. I guess one of the things that I just want to start with, if we're going to talk straight from the jump, what is everybody's favorite story out of this collection? Paul, which one rang with you as a story?
You know, I gotta be honest that these weren't like top tier stories overall for me, and it's a problem I have.
Surprised if they were, I would be.
I mean, no, I mean, I think there's some are solid. You know, I mean, it's the golden age of DC. Anything like golden age, silver age is silver age is a little easier for me to get into, you know. But like with Marvel, but even like some of that early Spider-Man Ditko stuff, the artwork gets by because Ditko is an incredible storyteller, and you know, and even like Stan Lee's his plot threads and what he wants to do is still great. But they're still like rough at times, right? We're just
Sheldon Maldoff and Dick Sprang are iconic in their own respects, but they don't have the dimension of someone like Ditko. I mean,
no,
Ditko in a lot of ways was way ahead of his time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like that's what makes Ditko so great. He's not a refined artist. He's so ahead of his time and so interesting and so creative that he is a goat, right? Like this is how it is. But and these comics aren't bad as like, even from a layout perspective, they're very simple. And like there's a ludicrousness, obviously, which is both charming and also just kind of distracting at points. I would say off the top of my head, my favorite probably is probably the most obvious one, which is gonna be probably the dad one, but the first Batman. That's a pretty clever, I think, interesting idea. I'm assuming that's what everyone's favorite is. People in the chat, leave a comment, all that stuff. But like, I'm curious if you guys have read this, of all those issues. I put a list of what we're reading in the actual subject heading, which I'm doing a better job of this, by the way, Chris, as far as putting what we actually talk about in the actual the description of the video. But in the video, you can actually go and illegally read these somewhere because DC doesn't want you to legally read them for whatever reason. But I would say that this one was probably the most overall, I'd say, interesting. Well, of its time, right? I would say this was my favorite, followed up by the Batmite one because it's so ridiculous. Batmite's just ridiculous, and I love Batman talking about spanking someone. Like that's hilarious, in a very like, I'm gonna spank you, mister. It's like, oh, that's great. So, those are my two favorite. These aren't bad, I would say, because in the context of what again, context is key, right? Like what is exactly this is, of its time. You have to take all those things into account. It's just reality. So, but those are the two that left the most impression on me. I do like the Zara, whatever one too, but that's a whole different podcast. Zuranar, whatever is that? That's a great
Batman,
cover. The covers
Superman
are great.
Of Planet X.
These are great covers. I would say the covers are better than the actual comic.
Okay, yeah.
For the most part.
Sure. Javi, do you have a favorite, a standout for yourself?
I mean, I'd have to agree with Paul. The first Batman was an obvious favorite of mine because I was familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
And also just from 89, I got in the Batman serial, the Untold Tales of the Batman or Untold Legend of the Batman. It was like 3 issues, and it was kind of recapping Batman's history at that point as he was trying to solve a mystery. Sure. And this was one of the stories that got adapted in that. And I always really liked the design of the first Batman, just with the more demonic looking ears and the way the cape flowed back and how they used it in RIP. But from reading the Casebook recently, one that really stood out to me was The Man Who Ended Batman's Career. Like, I thought that one and the following story too were just really Am I Really Batman, where they just really stood out.
That's a great cover. That is a fantastic cover.
How they would influence Morrison's run. Oh, it's cool. I'm sure Pete is surprised I didn't pick the Batman Superman of Planet X. I like that story a lot. But I like the animated episode more from The Brave and the Bold. Like, they were able to do more fun stuff with it by having prior voice actors come back and play with the Superman tropes a little bit more, with having Clancy Brown as like Ruth the Thole, and Dana Delaney is like a Vicky Vale Lois Lane hybrid and stuff. So even though I've got Peter Vera's favorite Batman figure of all time, Zurinar, here, he also has the one with the Bruce Wayne sculpt, and I think he has the gold edition, and he has them all autographed by Todd McFarlane because he loves Zurinar so much. But
well, if I may really quickly, for my sake, because you guys have both obviously read this, the Grant Morrison run as a whole, I have not, and even though I'm going to say right now, I wish I would have known a little bit not to read the foreword by Grant Morrison. It was a tad spoilery, a tad. But that being said, I will say that for our audience, try not to spoil what he uses necessarily. I have a little bit of an idea because I've read, obviously, especially with Chip Zdarsky's run, I had to kind of know what that whole thing was about, and it made more sense when I think it was you, Javi, who told me what that whole thing was, or one of you two did, and it made a lot of sense. But try not to explain and over. Oh no, you're good. No, not, that wasn't even at you, Andrew. I promise. I'm just saying on the stream itself. Like, let's not give too much to the audience for people who maybe are going into it. No, you're good. You're good, Andrew. You're good. I just whatever we can do to make it just for me, because I haven't read your comment, to be quite honest. Which save whatever we can for people to read in the book. So
let me put you a little bit at ease,
please.
Yes, the introduction gives a couple of loose details. I would be shocked if you were able to put those pieces together in the way that the stories do. I don't think
that's good. No, and that's good. I'm just saying for us. I'm just saying besides the thing for me. Sure. Don't on this here. Try to give us some kind of like allude to like what what.
No, we're not. Yeah. We're not going to go into, because we're going to talk about those issues.
Yeah, and keep in mind, 2 of these don't have any bearing really on what Morrison's telling.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
like this one.
Looking at you. This is they included this story because it is indicative of the insanity of the era. And
is that really that's why they put it in there?
Yeah. And there's also just like this idea of how do you reconcile this exactly with post-crisis Batman? Because you shouldn't really be able to. But that was sort of the mission statement that Morrison determined pretty early on when they were beginning this entire journey, was that, okay, everything happened. That's the conceit. that I'm running with for the stories that I want to tell. Everything happened. So how do you reconcile something like that with a post Frank Miller year one Batman? And it's a very big challenge. And the fact that it is pulled off as well as it is, at least in my opinion, says a lot about the strength of the run overall.
And I really want to talk about that for a second, because from someone like myself, who I like to think of myself as someone who's open to things. And one of the things I will always say is I'll always try to give a story the benefit of the doubt and try to enjoy it. I may not always like everything, right? Now, I will also give the benefit of the doubt and be a little more forgiving for when you go for the crazy, right? Or you go for something that's very ambitious. This, and what you've told me and what I've read and heard about this, is very ambitious and very interesting. And I think that the fact that he pulls it off as much as he has, even from a standpoint, not obviously you can't please everybody, but from a standpoint of it not being completely hated, which I know it's got its haters. I get it. I know Pete's one of them. Pete, I love you, but whatever. But my point is the fact that you have so many people like Chris and Javi, and I know plenty of people like Andrew. There's plenty of people that I know that are outside of our bubble that do like this a lot. And it just speaks to the fact that he succeeded more than he did not succeed. It seems like, from my perspective, as far as it being telling a successful tale of this idea of reconciling these stories that are ridiculous, like a man-ape Batman, and making it make sense in the continuity of what the post-crisis is. So it is fascinating to me on that level alone why I want to read the whole run, because I think Grant Morrison's a phenomenal Batman or a phenomenal writer, right? But the fact that he loves comics so much and is like, you know what, I'm going to take this ridiculous concept and take it to the house and really, try to play it up. And comparing it, Chris, to year one Batman to and how you fit together is just a mind-blowing idea of itself. So I cannot wait to get into it.
It's the only kind of story that you can tell in this medium, by acknowledging the full publication history and figuring out a way to reconcile it in a way that feels truthful. Because another hallmark, I believe, of Morrison's work generally, but most especially on the Batman titles, is that it's unpredictable. But there's two ways you can do that. Unpredictability, just for the sake of being unpredictable, oftentimes sucks because no care or attention is given to try and make that make sense. It's like a Vince Russo swerve, for those of you who know what I'm talking about. Those things suck.
I only know about that recently, and I'm like, God damn.
They don't make sense. Morrison's, this is far from a pejorative. Morrison's insanity, the strength of Morrison's insanity in the storytelling, is that everything is very well built. Now, you may not like it, but that doesn't mean that they don't give an abundance of thought and care to constructing how these things work and why one thing leads to another in a logical progression, as long as the logic is internal to the story, because under most circumstances, it probably wouldn't be seen as logical. But with the internal dynamics and the internal logic of the storytelling in making Batman's entire publication history a part of the story, it's just such a fascinating time. I said it before in promoting the concept of this show. Morrison's run, you never saw anything like it before, and I guarantee you'll never see anything like it again. It's unique.
And just to piggyback off of this, and we can move on really quickly, but I just got to add to the fact that, not only did he, reconcile the idea of these ridiculous stories in with Frank Miller's year one continuity in Batman or whatever, but he also introduced, let's say, not my favorite Robin, but
you haven't even read the stories yet, man.
Hold on. Before listen. I'm just saying he introduced Damian Wayne in this whole thing. So like the fact Grant Morrison has done a lot of good for Batman, and I think this is this is part of it. I think the Batman of Planet X, I think, is a really just from the peripheral knowledge I know of it, is a fascinating idea.
Yeah, and I mean, as much as people can get kind of caught off guard by a lot of the things that Morrison does in the run, the fact of the matter, at least to me, is that you need to have a semblance of unpredictability and truthfulness, but Morrison is also a creator who really innately understands the characters that they write. It's Paul, it's something that you and I talked about when we unpacked the first arc of New X-Men back when this was a podcast. I mean, you were raving about the way that Morrison wrote Cyclops, and I don't know if a lot of people necessarily goes like, wow, this is an awesome Cyclops, but you're right, because it's truthful, and the truthfulness, you might not like the direction of the plots, but I don't honestly see how someone can take an abundance, a boatload of issues with the way he characterizes people. One of the key examples of that in this run, which we will certainly get into, is the Joker. I don't think you have anyone who has ever written the Joker better across their entire body of work. You go back to Asylum up through R.I.P. and beyond. Grant Morrison's Joker, to me, is the Joker. But briefly before we move on, this one's my favorite. Robin Dies at Dawn is arguably the most important story that's included in here, at least in my estimation, because it is the story that ends up serving as a foundation for one of the critical villainous presences in the Morrison run. And you wouldn't necessarily know it, but and Morrison even alludes in the introduction to the Black Casebook, you read some of the lines that certain characters say differently, knowing the additional context that is added by the work that Morrison does on the Bat titles. But it's also just a facet on its own in isolation. Like if it wasn't necessarily connected to something that came later, to me, Robin Dies at Dawn is probably the most fascinating story in this collection because of how weirdly ahead of its time it is in depicting elements of trauma and the way that trauma can linger in someone's mind. Batman's mind plays quite literal tricks on him over the course of this story, and it gets to the core of his care for people that I would also argue is a hallmark of Morrison's time on the titles. But it's just a very clever way to depict Batman's resiliency. And the way that Morrison applies this story specifically to the wider run is a masterclass in superhero storytelling, as far as I'm concerned, because you have a creator who understands the history, who applies that history to a new story that's being told while honoring the creators that came before. And I think that's exemplified by the inclusion of Robin Dies at Dawn in the Black Casebook, but the Robin Dies at Dawn arc leading up to R.I.P. is something I'm really looking forward to talking about.
And the fact that it's a two-part story, none of the other ones that are in this collection have that page real estate.
Yeah.
And just looking at the collection as a whole, just the amount of creativity that went into these bizarre stories. And this was just another, short story for whoever is creating it. But like they would churn out like dozens of these stories of just the weirdest concepts. And it's, I don't know, it's kind of fascinating to read and look at them and see, how they inspired stories that came 40 years later.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, this is just the reason I feel like this story is as good as it is. It's because it is in the hands of the master. It is in the hands of Bill Finger. Moldoff, I don't want to minimize Sheldon Moldoff's work in these stories in particular, but Bill Finger is clearly a guy who was thinking in rather advanced terms for its time, especially about the psychology of his creation. And that is just, it's ridiculously on display in Robin Dies at Dawn. So, if for no other reason you need to find this collection, I would say this is the most critically important story to the Morrison run in particular, but it is also just an absolutely fascinating artifact of the Silver Age, and how through zaniness, objective zaniness that the Silver Age certainly applied to Batman, there is complexity and character depth to be found in those stories that were way ahead of their time in 1963.
Well, even something that's just complete zaniness, like the Rainbow Creature, which I don't want to say it's a clunker, but it's down there on my list for what's collected in this edition. One, because it doesn't have like a payoff necessarily in the Morrison work, but it's so freaking bizarre.
Yeah.
And out there, and just has this really quick conclusion of, well, okay, we're done, let's go on. Like from today's perspective, where we would have like all this buildup of where it came from and what happened after to it, and it's just Bill Finger had a deadline and came up with like this bizarre idea and put it to use for like 10 pages.
And as weird as it is, there is still an undercurrent of compassion to it for the creature by the end of the story, which I think is a difference maker.
And a detective element for Batman and Robin as well, and how they figure out how to stop it. Like it still showcases who they are as characters and their intelligence in trying to defeat it, even though like none of this makes any sense whatsoever.
Well, and again, like back in the day, this was, because the Comics Code, and everyone thought like, well, because the Comics Code basically made it feel like comics were only meant for kids because of Wortham. They had to tell ridiculous stories in order to carry these characters. And the fact that Bill Finger did that during like the dark times of comics, basically, he was able to still transcend and still connect to an audience, even though those stories were ridiculous. There's still like hints of the true Batman in there. Like Robin Dies at Dawn's a great example of that, right? Like these are all stories that still, even though they're meant to be fantastical, like there's still like the essence of Batman's there. It's just not like predominantly dark like the original, when they first brought the character out. So it's amazing to me that they're able, like, we talk about on the Spidey Dude Experience all the time, Javi, and I've talked about this a lot with, I think, modern comic storytelling. There's so much decompression that it's obnoxious. These are the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's like, let's put everything in 10 pages, and like, there's something cool about that too, because there's an art form. It's, to me, as someone who's very, very much not written a lot of comics in my day, but I've written a few scripts here, and I still want to write scripts. The thing about me, when I write, it's a lot easier for me to draw things out than to put a bunch of stuff together. And maybe other writers might be easier, but it feels to me it's a lot easier to decompress than to compress.
Well, and pacing took priority on
exactly. Yeah. So to me, it's fascinating that Bill Finger is a master. Even if, again, you have to look at these from the context of the time. He's able to compress kid-friendly stories that still match the character of Batman without sacrificing like quality at the time, and that's pretty impressive for a writer, especially when you're basically the heart of the character and written the character since the conception, and you're still writing these stories to try and make it work for the public.
Yeah, Robin Dies at Dawn, according to the book, the case was closed June of 1963. So you've got 1939 to 1963, was that 24 years of him coming up with Batman stories? Like, and that's several stories in an issue. That's not just like one story per issue. Like, how many stories did he actually write of Batman? Like, because they didn't keep the last story in this book, just says unknown for the writer.
Unknown. No one wants to take credit.
So I mean, just who has that volume of storytelling in them? And just, of course, he was coming up with all these weird ideas because he had to, make 3 or 4 Batman stories a month at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the descent, or I guess the forerunner for the Morrison run overall is probably Bill Finger. The guy's brain was incredibly prolific. And I think that you also get the sense too, reading this collection, as important as Robin Dies at Dawn is on sort of setting up the structure of the stories that are going to be coming, you guys are right about the first Batman as well. I mean, Morrison's use of this story is arguably to set sort of a perspective of potential perversion on the part of the villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's something we'll dive into, of course, once we get to those points. But between this and between the Club of Heroes, especially in the Batman of All Nations, there are clear parallels to see between the Batman of All Nations and Batman Incorporated, of course, but that's something that comes later. Batman of All Nations and the Club of Heroes has probably one of the most visually engaging stories of the entire Morrison run that'll be really fun to unpack issue to issue. But the foresight of realizing that this is a corner of Batman stories no one else wants to touch today. I just got, you guys know this, I just got this in the mail. I mean, you're not going to get someone like Judd Winnick going to this corner of Batman's history to try and say something new about. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Winnick. This set of stories is fantastic as modern Batman tome. But I've said it on the binge before, and Paul, you cited it. I love when a storyteller and when a story has ambition. Sometimes that ambition doesn't pan out, but Morrison's ambition to tell a wide-ranging narrative about the mind of this character that has captured the imagination of the world for the better part of 8 decades. I love the fact that it is aiming so high, and in my estimation, hits the target way more than it misses the target. But we got a lot of things to unpack over the course of this series. And I was saying earlier, I want a Lawman shirt now after revisiting this story. I don't think anybody would even know what the hell that is, but Team Lightning Man, right?
How do you guys feel about, from this book, the Club of Heroes and the Batman of Many Nations, or as a concept? Do you feel like there's enough of a Batman influence in these other international Batmen, or is it just kind of just kind of superfluous?
What do you think, Paul?
Well, I to be honest, I don't want to sound controversial here, but these are probably like my least favorite stories. Sorry, I'll get back up. I didn't like this story. I want to put that out right now. This was like my least favorite. I thought it was it felt like there's too many characters, and like again, this is when you compress too much into one story. And I lost track. I'm like, what's going on? Like, it's just like, Batman's a friend of mine. I love Batman.
Better? Do you like the Batman creature?
I'd read this. I would read Gorilla Batman over this any day of the week.
Wow. Okay.
Unknown's got to happen, baby. Okay. I liked it. Unknown's got to happen. No, but that being said, I didn't like that episode or that. Oh God, I'm doing that. I'm sorry. I got Ahsoka on the mind. I've been raving about Ahsoka all night. No, but I loved this issue where Batman teams up with the Chief Batman, and like I hope it don't offend anyone. Maybe this issue could offend people. I don't know. But I like the idea. The heart behind it was there. I felt. Yeah. A different time, let's just be real. Again, context is very key. But regardless, I thought it was an interesting thing that he would inspire someone, and then that would like. I like that idea that they would take on that moniker, which then would makes. I kind of already knew what Batman Incorporated kind of was before. This made more sense now in retrospect of where that kind of came from potentially, right? And so that's just my perception.
I'm wondering, Paul, if you hit a nail on the head here, and maybe this story is one of the reasons why they're not reprinting it, because they're worried about offending someone.
Which I can understand. It's
because they put on red face. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term. I think if you look at like Captain America, who recently had like, what is it called, Paul? Like they were trying to make a Captain America for each state.
Oh.
And all of them had like, you can see elements of Cap's costume with the star and everything.
Sure.
And the Batman nation here, like you've got Man of Bats and Raven, like that has a Batman and Robin feel. Knight and Squire feel you can feel like that's a British Batman and Robin, but some of the other people, like I don't necessarily get that Batman connection. And they try for it, not to get ahead of ourselves, but they try for it a little bit harder when we get to that era, Morrisonian wise. I feel like some of these are just kind of like, well, you're the hero of Greece, so you're the Greece Batman.
Yeah, even though he has nothing to do with Batman. It's like, you're the luchador guy, right? Or the matador guys. Therefore, you're
Gaucho. Yeah.
Yeah, Gaucho. Yeah, you're a Gaucho. You must be Batman of Spain. It's like, what? Like that doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's a little. I mean, again, of its time. But what sucks is, and again, let's legitimately. I think there's a way you could edit this comic personally, by not you take out that panel altogether and probably still have it make sense. Like Batman and Robin, we need you to impersonate us. And it's like take it on face value.
That's kind of you could argue that's kind of what the island of Mr. Mayhew ends up doing in the run proper. Is like, because that's the thing too, is that it becomes clear over the course of reading the Morrison run that yes, everything happened, but they might not have happened exactly in the way that they originally happened. That's most especially true with the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh. And it's a little bit more visible with Robin Dies at Dawn. Club of Heroes is also something where that might be the case. So Morrison in some ways gets a chance to modernize the original stories to a degree, because those original stories aren't the focus of his stories. They're just an inspiration for his stories. But there are a few points over the course of the run, as we'll see, where the previous events are referenced in some form or fashion. And when they are, sometimes they're taken verbatim as they were, but most of the time they're slightly modernized in a way.
And I think, honestly, and this is a kind of almost a bigger, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but I think the idea that Morrison is it's kind of almost not cherry picking, but understanding some of these things you can't just take verbatim. You have to kind of like manipulate a little bit, or say this, like basically he took the major story beats of every comic here, at least the very least, and made them canon for Batman, right? Essentially, right? That's what you're saying. And that's very much going back to Star Wars, funny enough, is that's kind of what they're doing now with when they incorporate from animation to comic books and things like that into live action. It's like the fine details are a tad different, but the major story beats are all there. So like, and to me, the fine details are like not that big of a deal. It's you talk about Star Trek. Like I don't know much about that, but you could take as long as the main points of whatever they're taking from are the same. That's all you need, right? And I think that's the kind of thing, even with Marvel continuity now, with 616, everything's going to be twisted a little bit. But as long as, all that stuff is still there, like all that stuff is still accurate for like the main story beats, that's all that really matters. I don't care if Peter wasn't watching TV or wasn't watching Mad Men when he first met Captain America. I don't care about that, right? Like, that's just it's as long as the essence of how he met Captain America, that's all that matters. And I think that's to me is what gets lost in the continuity wars of any franchise you talk about, is that you don't have to always have everything has to fit every single thing. As long as the major story beats are there, we're all going to be happy. But if you're like contradict the major story beats, that's when you F up. But I digress.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear to see that most stewards of long-standing canon in multiple franchises usually take the approach that it's the events that are canonical, not necessarily the things that date it or even the aesthetics, as we have talked about on Discovery Debrief a few times when it comes to modern exploitations of Star Trek that are in reference to stories that were told 50 years ago on television. The aesthetics do not really, like, if you treated Star Trek Strange New Worlds as a period piece and you revived the production design, set design of the original series for a modern TV show, well, you're kind of...
We wouldn't have gotten past the first season.
Exactly. I mean, the creative ambition and the execution needs to be able to be representative of current capabilities, right? And current perspectives on what constitutes good character interactions, good character studies. And Morrison and the run on Batman is emblematic of a very careful curation of the full history of this character that we're all obsessed with, and it still manages to be truthful in all the right ways. So yeah. And I mean, we just got so many insane things to talk about in the future. We talked about this story serving as the inspiration for this. I mean, they look kind of similar, but the approaches are rather radically different.
Yeah. I couldn't have anticipated that it would go the way that it did.
Yeah.
And it's still going, apparently.
Yeah, that I'm not as up to date on, unfortunately.
No, what the hell?
But at the same time, I mean, just the fact that a story that was told so long ago and in such a different time with such different expectations for comic book storytelling can serve as an inspiration for going in an entirely new direction with the same core concept. Yeah. That is
1958.
Yeah. To 2008, right? 50 years had elapsed when this story was told.
Well, I think this is the one thing that I would say from I don't even know if I like the execution, but Chris knows me well enough that I am a sucker for when people use continuity as an advantage rather than a deterrent. Like, it always makes me nervous when people go, we got to reboot things. We got to redo this. We got to retcon this. We got to do this. And retcons can work. Retcons can also destroy. And, or it's when it feels like they have to go back to the old well because they couldn't tell marriage stories anymore. Right, Javi? I mean, it's like, it's crazy to think about. Instead of using things to your advantage, you're going to you have to start from scratch. That to me feels like a cop-out. And that's the problem with retcons. You can only, they're mulligans, right? You can only have a few of those for a character within would say 30 years. And I think Batman is, from what I've seen so far, and Morrison's done this with a lot of his comics besides Batman, right, Chris and Javi. But the thing is, when you use continuity to your advantage, that's when you're, to me, doing the most for the character. Because by ignoring continuity or avoiding things and not embracing it, you're not embracing the greater, what makes a character good, the good and the bad. And I think that, to me, because again, people can take bad things and make it good. I'm trying to think of, I think I always think of Jeff Johns as the master. He is to me the master class of taking things and making them better. I look at Three Jokers. Made to me, I've never been a huge fan of The Killing Joke. He made The Killing Joke 1,000 times more bearable and more interesting, in my opinion. And I look at look what happened to Kyle Reiner and and Hal Jordan. You're a huge Kyle Reiner fan, Javi, but I would never imagined, and I've told Chris this 1,000 times, I would never imagined someone would be able to fix Hal Jordan the way he was able to. And that is embracing not ignoring what happened.
And keeping everybody. Because it would have been so easy to kill people. And
easy.
That's the strength of having a fan sort of graduate into writing. And I think Morrison they characterize themselves as a comic book fan. And it's clear to see in the reverence that the critical stories have, whether you want to talk about New X-Men or Batman or Superman, whether you're talking All-Star or New 52 Action Comics, there is a reverence for the iconography of the characters and the importance that the characters have to connect with people and tell stories that are compelling for people. Morrison is someone who recognizes the power of these characters. And I think that that's indicative, especially in the Batman run, by turning Batman into a shamanic figure, but who's also a guy. And his humanity is a key component of these stories. And he does a lot. And the DC universe is kind of handicapped when Bruce Wayne isn't around, but it's also a symbol that gave rise to a whole network of protectors that may not have been there otherwise because of this one guy.
Yeah, so, and I think that when you think about this just by itself, and what you've told me shows you that nothing should be discarded from continuity with the right writer, the right creative mind. And I think there's to me it just shows you the power of embracing continuity. And and like you said, like I think even as if you're not really a huge fan, but just researching and understanding the complexities that you can, what you can do with things. I mean, look at the Gibbon. Look what Nick Spencer did with the Gibbon, right? He made Gibbon. He wrote a fantastic story about one of the most throwaway Spider-Man characters ever, and it wasn't like on the nose. It was a very emotional story that he kind of built up in a few issues. And maybe gave him a great send-off, you could say, or a horrible send-off, you could say. But it made me really. It goes back to rereading these stories again with a different context, and that to me is what makes these big franchises so lovable and so interesting. Is when you can go back and read the stuff or watch the stuff or whatever, and you're like, oh, like this makes it so much better now, and that's what makes even the Parallax, the Hal Jordan thing better. When you look in perspective of what happened with Jeff Johns, this
was an era at DC where they were embracing the prior stories that had been told in order to tell newer stories. That's, I think, one of the things that makes the New 52 such a strange about face in that context, because you go from 2004 up through 2009 when they're telling stories like Green Lantern Rebirth or Batman R.I.P. and it's such an embracing of the lineage, and then they decide to eject that lineage. There are some caveats with that, but another thing too, and Javi, I'm curious about your perspective on this. The Black Casebook itself is a canonical object now.
Yeah.
All of the history of the stories, Batman is an excessive documentarian. And the craziest things that he encountered went in the Black Casebook. So, and it's a bit of a story, but it is a bit of a story point once we get into the run proper. But what do you make of just like the continuity maintenance that is done by Morrison in taking stories like the ones that are in the eponymous collected edition and actually making it a document for some of the craziest cases that Batman ever encountered?
I mean, it makes sense for the character because he is a detective that he would keep a record in some fashion of all these weird things that happened. And I don't know if Morrison ever said this, and that's where I'm pulling this from. But if you think of like year one, where the way that Miller tells the story, like Bruce is journaling, like talking to his father a lot. Yeah. And so having these early adventures in a casebook like continues that tradition. So it makes everything feel more cohesive, not just because he's referencing continuity in the form of the book, but because narratively it ties it in with the beginning. And that was one of the things I liked about the Batman, was seeing him, write in his book, it's been 2 years and I don't think I'm changing anything, stuff like that. I think it brings a cohesiveness to the universe. And to Paul's point, like just that the continuity doesn't have to be a hindrance. You can make something wonderful out of it.
Yeah. Well, and the continuity too is a meta narrative on the actual object that Batman keeps, that is the Black Casebook. It's just, it adds another layer to it, and it's indicative of the complexity of the storytelling that isn't so complex that it is indecipherable. All of the pieces are there. You just have to find them. Like, that's one of the things that I honestly respect a lot about Grant Morrison, is that, look, I'm telling this story, pedal to keep up,
Yeah.
And like, Morrison never babied you through things. And now some people I know, because I was on the other side of certain arguments at a prominent Batman website back in 2008 and 9, that is not a good way to tell a story. But for me, who was willing to go along for that ride and willing to do that pedaling to keep up, I got way more out of it than I think most other people did. And the experience of reading that story, those sets of stories, was so much better for it. And that's one of the things that I honestly hope to do in Nights Never Die, is provide some of the pedaling. I think we got a fair amount of the preliminaries out of the way by talking about the Black Casebook, because this does provide a rather important baseline for the kinds of stories that we are about to embark upon. So just as a slight reiteration, part 1 of Nights Never Die is by far the biggest part, because it encompasses the most issues. We go from Batman and Son through to the end of Batman R.I.P., which is arguably the most potent issues that make reference to the stories that are in the Black Casebook. But we're gonna go straight to Batman 65. With issue number 0, I feel like we sufficiently set the stage for everything that had happened in Batman's recent history up to the point that the Morrison run began. With this, we have sufficiently explored a lot of the history that inspires a lot of the Morrison stories, and then it's time to move up to the starting line and pull the trigger, because we got quite a while right ahead of us. Any final thoughts from you gentlemen on the Black Casebook and getting ready to embark on this full journey finally? Paul?
There we go. Sorry, so delayed. I'm just gonna say this really quick. I enjoy this for what it was, but it sucks that DC, for whatever reason, doesn't have this available on DC Infinite. Like, it sucks, and it sucks that it takes so. This is a pretty expensive thing to pick up. Feels like they should at least reprint these in some way or shape or form. But yeah, it's really fun to kind of go into and read this, and I'm excited to go deep dive into the Morrison run itself. So yeah, I'm excited to get this started.
Awesome. Javi?
Just that reading these again, like before we get going, it's having that hindsight of where we're going to go, or foresight. With Morrison, it's hard to tell when you're talking about time. But especially as we get towards the middle and end of this. But I actually got a lot of enjoyment out of reading these, not just because of where they are. It's fun Batman. I mean, there are different shades and flavors of Batman, and I certainly respect those who like solo Batman and those who like Bat Family Batman. And the way I was brought up, it's just I kind of embraced all different aspects of it. So for me, this is a lot of fun, and I can't wait to keep going on this journey and see where Morrison, or re-see where Morrison takes us on it, because it's quite a ride, and I can't wait to see what new insights we get into the material as a group going forward.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, if there's ever any poster child for the versatility of the Batman character and the plethora of ways he can be applied to storytelling, you can find it in here. And you can certainly find it over the course of Morrison's run that marries these previous concepts that were so rife with imagination, but very much products of their time, with one of comics' greatest auteurs. So it's going to be fascinating. Looking forward to taking people on the journey along with us. Look for details to come soon about when we are going to begin with Batman number 655, but certainly keep an eye on the Comic Binges part 3, because that's kind of where this whole thing really does begin chronologically. So thank you. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Comic Binge here on YouTube.
Please.
You can find me on a number of different platforms at Chris Clow, CHRISCLOW. Paul, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Herman22 with 2 N's, aka P Thug. And then you can also do all the things that Chris said: like, subscribe, leave a love note, all that jazz. Really appreciate it. Next week, Javi's coming back. We've got some Miles Morales Spider-Man goodness on the Spider-Man Council as we return next week, which Javi pitched his idea, which he forgot about, thankfully.
Yeah, so many.
He always, yeah.
I couldn't remember which one we were going to do.
It's great. But anyway, no, we got a lot. And so basically, we're going to be doing the first run of Ziegler's. I always forget, Cody Ziegler, his new Miles Morales run, which is all available here on. Let me prep myself up here a little bit. On Marvel Unlimited, as you can see here. It'll be a lot of fun to read that. It's the first 5 issues we'll be going over. But yeah, that'll be all available. It's all available on Marvel Unlimited, or probably on, I'm assuming, also on Hoopla. But yeah, that's all next week. First, go to the comic shop, support whatever you fancy. And again, so if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe today to the Comic Binge. I really appreciate it. Chris, go ahead and or Javi, where can people find you at, sir?
At Javi True at Twitter. I refuse to call it the other name. You can also go to the Flash Up to Speed with Wally West on YouTube. I've got a channel there. Hopefully I'll be filming something new this week. Get back into habit. I got a little knocked off by being under the weather, but hopefully I'll have a new episode soon. And then, of course, BatmanOnFilm.com. Batman The Adventures Continue is wrapping up, or just did. I don't even remember anymore. What war are we on right now, Chris? I've got a review for Catwoman coming up. Is it the Bat-Cat War? I don't.
Oh,
Gotham War.
Batman, Catwoman, the Gotham War, I think is.
Yeah. So I've got
incredible about that, by the way. Oh my god!
Coming up in a week or two, Batman. Is it Gargoyle of Gotham, or I don't even remember.
Oh, the Raphael Grandpa.
The Raphael Grandpa one from Black Label is coming out in a week, and I need to rewrite my review for that, but it's an amazing book. I'll just tell you that off the bat. No pun intended. So yeah, all the usual places, and like Paul said, I guess I'll be here next week talking Spidey.
Yeah, right, Will.
All right. Well, with that, I'll leave you with these final words.
Please.
Zer and R. Bye.
Read more comics.
Read more comics.
And read more comics.